All right. Hey, guys, let's move on to number 3 here that we got on the docket. Number 3, in regards to the top 10 ways to make sure your child hates Jesus and his church, choose to attend a separate church than your kids. All right. I think this is a big one. I think it's a big one because parents are thinking, well, look, we're all in church, aren't we? As long as we're all in church, isn't that a good thing? What say you? Let's go.
That's like sitting down for a family dinner and your child's at another family's house eating dinner, and you're like, well, we're all eating dinner at the same time. You know?
I'm about to. I feel John and I look at each other because this is a big one for my current context and has been a big one in several contexts. But I feel like Rambo and the old Rambos with the big saw, and he's going,
Yep.
Things are blowing up. But why? Why do you think, as a parent, it's going to be okay? And let's just take it to the extreme. You're sending your child to a place that there is zero accountability. You have zero understanding of the adults that could do anything from touch them to speak heresy into them. And you don't have any way of understanding it. And it's so prevalent where I'm at that they have coined the phrase, "This is my Wednesday church." Well, here's what happens.
Wow.
Yeah, it's so stupid. And so we do home groups. So parents are sitting, and I have, to my detriment, because we're a church plant and we're smaller, we have twice as many kids in our student ministry than we do in our whole church. And so they're showing up, but their parents, and the other sides of it are too, you expect that that a pastor is going to take care of your kid. You give zero financially to that church. And so that you're taking away from other people that faithfully give. But the third one is just outside of all of those just idiotic things and those frustrating things, the other side of it is there is zero family accountability and ability to minister to your family. One example is we had a family go through an incredibly traumatic experience and with a parent, and that child doesn't go to the church, to his parents' church. And there is zero, we don't have any way to really minister to them or to know what their church is doing or how they're doing it. And so what's happening is the whole family is split up right now. The kids come to us and we pour everything we can into them and love them. But the parents they go wherever. And truthfully, like most people, they go to a massive like franchise church where they don't know the people anyway. In fact, they called me to come and lead a prayer for the dad because they were doing this stuff and for all these issues. And I came, and the guy that started it, who was his best friend, said that I was from the other church that they go to. And I said, well, obviously none of it's a big deal to any of y'all. But I just sat there and my heart breaks for these kids. But also it limits the ability that we can even hold a student accountable, because once you have an uncomfortable conversation for them and you say, hey, this is a sin and this isn't okay, they just leave. And so you're creating, so I'm writing a blog post for our current ministry right now. It's on my docket. That parents that do this and that go to separate churches than their kids, we're creating spiritual refugees. We're creating kids that know that they have some type of citizenship somewhere, but are completely displaced from where they should be. And they grow up just going, I guess I can just bounce around from place to place to place. And so nobody ever grows. It's like an Arrested Development situation. So, I mean, that's my angry soapbox.
I would just add this is that we do a really good job in America of producing consumers and not disciples.
That's right.
And this is one of the, like, if I'm going to do a self-check, like if I'm doing a COVID test at home, right? If I'm doing a spiritual discipleship inventory at home, and I want to know, how am I doing discipling my children? If my kids are going to a different church than me, homie, you're not discipling your kids. You're just not. In my house, it was not an option. So the youth ministry across town at First Baptist on the Square, when I was in student ministry, was booming. Like, bro, they had 250, 300 people a week on Wednesdays, and we're over here at Rosemont, and there's like 30 of us. And I'm like, I don't want to be here. Do you want to be here? And so I'm talking to all my friends, and like, well, I don't want to be here either. So a couple of my friends leave.
Smoke machines across town.
They did. So they had all this crazy stuff going on across town. So they go over there, and they're like, all right, man, come on. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to talk to my parents. So I talked to my dad, and my dad said, yeah, son, that's great. I'm really happy that they have that going on over there. but you go to church at Rosemont, so that's where you're going to go.
That's right.
And I was like, come on. Like, it was this big fight. And my dad was just like, that's not where we go to church, son. You're going to be committed where we are. And you know what? I didn't have any kind of, like, my preference not being met when I was in high school. I'm 32 years old right now. I'm over it. I don't care.
Yeah.
Like, it's just not a big deal. But what I did know from my dad, hey, son, that's great. I'm really happy that they're having success. That's not where you go to church.
To your point, John, and something we deal with here, and this is where I think it goes on to the parents, because you said something, your parents are committed and that you were going to be committed. But here, when we deal with it here, and when I've dealt with a student, I speak truth, and we've lost some students because they're, and thankfully some of them, their parents go, okay, well, I'll go to the same church now. I'm like, good, even if it's not my church. And so, but what amazes me is that a lot of the reason we get kids and the kids come is because, and I meet with parents, I do my best to do family ministry, but when we meet with them, they go, yeah, well, our church really doesn't have anything for like students and family, and 3 of our kids are in the student ministry. So we just are like, we want to send them there, but we'll keep going here. Well, why are you going there? Well, because, I don't really enjoy it, but my dad goes there. And I'm like, well, first of all, man up. You got 3 or 4 kids. Yep. But secondly, my statement is, then why? Why? That to me shows what John's saying, this consumer mentality, but also an incredibly like shallow, immature faith, that you would not say God's word can be open and God can speak in any church. So even if it's for 4 or 5 years, I'm going to find the church that ministers to my family and I'm going to plug in there. Like, that should be how it is. Find the church that is ministering to your family that you can rally around and you can be a part of. And you know what? If you decide to go to your parents' local family of believers and you do that after your kids are graduated, fine. But why? My question is, why as a parent wouldn't you go to the place, or would you not make sure your kids, if you feel like you're in the right place, are connected where you're at? I don't get that, I guess.
You know what I honestly think it is? I think when the parents experience a lack of accountability in their spiritual life at the church they attend, they don't expect that for their students.
Yeah.
And so if you're a parent and you're saying, yeah, I think it's okay if my kid decides where they want to go to church as long as they're at church, I would question your level of commitment and accountability in the church that you're currently at anyway. Maybe you need to go with them.
Most of the kids I have, they don't know the name of the pastor at the church they go to or the student pastor of the church they go to. And I'm like, that's a problem.
Yeah. Well, and anyway, to that point, what's really unhealthy is when the families say, well, I know he's our pastor, but you're really our pastor. And I'm like, no, I'm not. No, our head pastor is your pastor because our head pastor is my pastor. I'm one of your pastors.
I think John, the accountability thing is 100% right. There is, I posted online the other day and it got a little bit of traction, but with people, and they got it, but it's people find churches that they can agree with. And that's why, the massive churches, and I don't have a problem with the church being big. I've served in mega churches all my life, but big or small, they can have issues. But the bigger that they get, and, it doesn't matter what, I won't name them because this isn't my podcast, but I do know that some of them, they won't take any stance on anything because that, like, I've had families come to me and go, we ask about security of the believer, which is a pretty important doctrine to just secondary doctrine to understand, and kind of rolls into some primary. And so they read in a members class, they said, hey, what about being saved and keeping your salvation? And they won't take stands on it. And they'll actually hush the question and move off, because they say we want to reach as many people as possible, so we take stands on as few things as we can. But that's the culture. And so you have a whole group of people that they don't have accountability, John, because they've probably bounced to 2 or 3 or 4 churches or found the church that doesn't do anything to make them feel really good. And I always, well, I'm not going to say that because it's not my podcast. Is this podcast for 13 and over?
John just went pinkies up. If I can steal something from you guys there, right?
I heard this phrase at a church conference about leadership, but I will say, and this may get edited out, but the way that we approach Christianity as families and as a church, it might feel good at the moment, but it leaves you with nothing and broken, and it accomplishes no good. And so we have a bunch of people that feel good and that say, well, I went to this church and I feel really great, but their lives are unchanged and their families just walk away from Jesus. And I think that is a really, really sad place to be. And frankly, it's like investing in your retirement, which most of our country doesn't do. It's not fun to put $500 a month back, but it sure pays off in the end. And I would love to see families that say, I'm going to take the hit.
Yeah, that's Deuteronomy 6, bro. Small deposits over time.
That's right.
You know,
that's Dave Ramsey too.
Well,
just kidding.
Oh man.
Next.
Yep. We're going on. All right, guys, we're moving into point 4. We're talking about the top 10 ways to make sure your child hates Jesus and his church. I did not come up with that title. That was from my good friends, John Oliver and Ian Dunaway with the T Podcast. We're only talking about a few of these. If you want the entire list, you can go check out the T Podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts from. Guys, we're into, according to my list here, not according to your all's Ultimate 10 list, but in my list, we're on number 4. Don't serve in student ministry with your kids. Now, like I said, I've been in youth ministry for a long time, and I have begged and pleaded with parents to be involved in student ministry, and you always get the classic answer, well, they just need their own time. You know, they're with me all the time. Let them go here by themselves. They don't need me there. What say you?
I say that's a bad decision.
Agreed. Agreed. Moving on. No, just kidding.
I think this is actually where, Stephen, we might have had you on the tee, but you had a great quote that I have used because I never thought about it this way. But I have, and I mentioned it to parents since, but you seem to only think that when it's the church, but you don't take that same tact when it's your kid's football game. Like, right. You don't go, no, they need their own space to play football. No, you go and you're loud.
You join the coaching staff is what you do.
That's exactly right. I don't think so. And I would say this too. This is to maybe to those student pastors and parents. And maybe you need to mention students. I don't know if I think it's always healthy I don't think it's healthy very often to be your kid's leader. So I think that they're not going to be as honest. There's always that favoring thing, or they feel frustrated. But there should be more jobs in a student ministry than leading a group. And if that's not the case, then make them up or do them or whatever. But I'm telling you, my parents counted for our church. That church that I grew up at was all about numbers, and so they always had to get their counts. Well, that is, whether you agree with that or not, that gave my parents a really good job to collect rolls and to do the counting and stuff, and they were just around. And so I think that gives, there's a couple things that does. One, I think that gives parents a really realistic view of just how awful kids are. And I don't think kids are awful and I hate them. I'm just saying they're kids, they're students, they grow up. But I remember, I think Stephen, you would have too, and John, we started ministry when it was still like, if a kid acted a certain way, if a student acted a certain way, and you went to a parent and said, they're doing this, the parent's like, it's like a comedy deal where they shut the door and then you hear, Mama, stop, Mama, and they're spanking them. Now it's like, my 7th grader said that you bullied him. What? I'm a 35-year-old man. I'm not bullying your 7th grader, and there's 300 other kids here. Why would I pick on him? And so I've seen that shift. But I have noticed, in fact, we even had a parent start in our ministry here. We have several, we link parents up anytime. But we had them, and the question, when we stopped at, because I had some parents that were tense because we had to be hard on these kids to get them to be quiet. They just wouldn't in the format that we were at. And one of the moms came in and she went, oh, it's bad. This is terrible. She goes, I see what you're dealing with. And so I think there's a healthy reality for a parent that comes along that goes, oh yeah, my kids are just as fallen and broken as everybody else and as me, so I can deal with that. On the other side of it, it gets down to this idea that it's really all kind of the same point that all of these 5 or 10 things hit, is that it puts Christ in, and whether you look at it like a top 5 priority list, or you look at it like a gravitational pull of a planet where it will just, your world's going to revolve around it. It makes church the priority. When I see my parents place value in church and not become what it becomes at every church I've been at, and it's holy babysitting, it's holy babysitters club. That's what they treat student ministry like. For me, that's a big deal because all of a sudden your parents care. They show up, they engage, you know what's being taught and how it's being taught. If there's a real issue, it's there. But most importantly, your kids see that what's happening is important. It's as important to them as showing up to your football games or to your college stuff or your high school stuff or whatever it may be. So parents, go ahead.
No, I'm just going to say what you just said is so true, because that's just going to teach. It's going to teach prioritization of what's important again. Because if the kids know, well, my mom and dad are at every single sporting event that I do, but they don't come with me to church, or they're not involved with me in the student ministry or something like that. Man, that's just going to create this mentality that says, well, this obviously isn't as important to them. And how this is affecting me. So, John, chime in here.
So I'll just tell this story, and I think it fits. And if you don't think it fits, then just edit it out. But so when I got a car in 10th grade, I got a Pontiac Grand Am GT. It was white with a sunroof. It was sweet. I loved that car, and it didn't cost much to fill up, and I could go a really long ways on a gas tank. But I was 6'2" and 170 pounds when I got my Grand Am. So when I graduated high school, I was 6'6", 270 pounds. So I'd grown 4 inches and I'd gained 100 pounds, 4 foot.
5 pounds an inch.
You're like Apache Chief. Do you remember him from the old DC comics? You know, he would say something, and then it was like the Native American word for big man is what it was, and then he would grow into like a 50-foot giant. Like, continue.
So I have a different story about being called a big man in Haiti. That's pretty funny, but it's not appropriate for a podcast. It was an orphan called me that. But anyway,
I appreciate that.
It's not bad. It's just not. It doesn't fit this. So anyway,
okay,
so
gotcha.
I went from 6'2", 170 to 6'6", 270. It doesn't work when you get that big in a Pontiac anymore. It just does not work. Pontiacs were not created for offensive linemen. And so I'm telling my dad, like, Dad, this is really uncomfortable for me. Like, I have to open the sunroof to be able to drive, or I have to really recline my seat if it's raining. I have to shove my legs in, and I can't turn the wheel all the way because my hand hits my knee. So I've got all this stuff going on, and my dad's just thinking, like, he just keeps telling me, like, no, you just don't like that car because your buddies all have these big trucks. You just want me to get you a big truck. And I'm like, okay, it's not what I'm telling you. I'm telling you, I don't fit in the car anymore. So anyway, my dad gets in the car to ride with me to just check and see how things are going before he sends me 8 hours away to UCF. He's like, I just want to ride with you for a day and see how the car is driving and all this kind of stuff. So I didn't know this, but when we got home, everything was good with the car. But we got home and he had a conversation with my mom, and he said, I feel so bad. I have not believed him. I've just thought he was lying to me. And I thought he just wanted another car. We've got to do something. And so a week later, he gives me the keys to his truck and he takes my car. And I said, what are you doing? And he said, son, I'm sorry. I didn't believe you. There's no way that you've been comfortable driving that car. I didn't know until I got in the car with you.
That's a good story.
Yeah,
so
that fits.
So he got into the car with me, and he was able to experience it and see the discomfort, see the challenges, and see all these things. Look, when the parents are not getting into the car, you just have to rely on what your student's telling you. The problem is so many parents just want to chalk it up to, well, I don't really know that that's what's going on over there, you know? So parents, get into the car and see what's going on. There's a difference in giving your kid a bicycle and giving your kid a cell phone.
That's 100%.
When your kid gets on a bicycle and they're driving, when they come home, you're not asking them, hey, did the chain stay on the whole time? Was the seat comfortable? What did you see when you went down the road? When your student gets a cell phone, you do need to say, hey, did you see anything today that made you think twice? Did you see anything today that made you uncomfortable? And as parents, we need to recognize those things. We need to be able to get in the car with them, and we need to check the phone.
Every parent, to your point, every parent would benefit greatly. In another church that I was at, I had a mom who was incredibly aggressive and hateful. toward, we mentioned, I rarely, depending on the context, I try and be careful about what I preach and what I say, but I also am clear because I know what kids are going through. And her 7th grader, I said one time that pornography was a bad thing. Didn't go into detail on it, just said that it wasn't a good thing. And that was most of what we talked about. Well, her 7th grade son, was talking to her about it. And so she came to me the next day, and she was even on staff at the church, but never went into student ministry. And her response was, well, she goes, my son doesn't even know what pornography is. And I said, well, he's in 7th grade, and 10 years old is the normal time that happens. And she went, well, she goes, he just doesn't know. So anyway, we walked through all of that. But what I brought up to her was, I've got a lot of 8th grade girls that come to my wife and I and are struggling with all of these different sexual sins and things. It's really prevalent. But I think to John's point too, kids or adults being around other students and hearing them talk in a confidential setting, it really helps them understand the world their kids live in, rather than trying to shelter them, which I know we'll get into, and shelter them away from the world.